Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll get started. This afternoon's moderated session is about the role of fauna in ecosystem restoration. My name is Dave Loewensteiner. I work for the Australian Government Supervising Scientist branch. One of my current roles is to help develop restoration standards for fauna at the Ranger Uranium Mine. And a theme of sort of this conference has been, a lot of talk about and restoration in the context of ecosystems, but oftentimes you find that people are really just talking about plants and trees. The role of fauna in ecosystem restoration is sometimes thought of as in the sense of the field of dreams, which is if you build it, they will come. So if you've seen this movie or read the book was called Shoeless Joe. I think it was written in the early 80s. Kevin Costner made the film, or was started to make the film, was started in the Field of Dreams sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, and built a baseball field in the middle of the United States, somewhere in Kansas or something, in a cornfield, and had this dream of playing baseball with all these legends of the game, and had this sort of vision that came to him and said, if you build a baseball field in the middle of nowhere, people will come, these legends will show up and play with you. And the key line was that if you build it, they will come. Is that really true? I don't know. Carla Catterall wrote a paper in 2018 called Fauna as Passengers and Drivers in Vegetation Restoration. It was a bit of a pretty nice synthesis. I took this figure, which I've used before, and I find to be quite interesting in the sense that in the center, you have your vegetative processes that people look at often in restoration ecology, and people talk about these things like seeds and seedlings, fruiting and flowering, and how do you develop mature plant ecosystems. But surrounding that sort of inner circle are strong interactions on the positive and negative side with fauna. Obviously, the plant world in terms of restoration doesn't operate without those processes happening, such as herbivory, seed predation, dispersal, pollination, etc. And some of those interactions are positive and mutualistic, and some of them are sort of negative, like herbivory, but probably necessary from an ecological ecosystem perspective. So we go over to this Sarah wheel, which obviously was front and center in Teen and Kingsley's talks this morning. And I mean, you can look at it from as they said, sort of this ecosystem-wide perspective, but they were largely, I think, I took out of it plant community development, right? I mean, there is mention on the wheel of animals. There's all trophic levels, et cetera, that are represented. But if you look at each of those sort of subsections on the wheel, many of those are strongly mediated, driven, or interacted with fauna. So things like external exchanges, absence of threats and overutilization of invasive species, substrate, both in the physical and chemical sense, strongly mediated by animals of all sizes and sorts and sizes. Another paper looked at by Cortescu et al. In 2012 was a review of fauna and mine rehabilitation in Australia. On the top, they looked at these are basically each of those little dots is both historic and current mines. That's about 10 years ago, and across the continent that just exist. And the bottom are basically our stars representing those mines that have anything to do in the restoration planning with fauna. So obviously it's just a very small set that are actually even considering fauna in the mine rehabilitation space. Sophie Cross et al. 2019, she looked at overlooked and undervalued and neglected role of fauna and a global bias in ecological restoration assessments. They looked around in a literature review. In the last 50 years, there's been 100 fauna restoration publications dealing with mine sites. If you were to look at all mine site restoration work and look at the vegetation sort of community side, that would be several orders of magnitude larger than that. So what do we need to do to move beyond sort of a field of dreams concept? I put together this sort of session in 5 talks. You couldn't possibly cover it. You might not cover it in 25 talks. But I thought I'd write together a few different speakers and types of focuses to sort of build a little bit of a framework where you could think about how do we better incorporate fauna into restoration. So the first two talks are by Holly Bradley and Ian Sluter. They're both going to focus on what I'd say are critical aspects of fauna ecology and how you incorporate those aspects of individual species into restoration. And then there'll be two talks by Kristen Fernandez and Mika Vanderheide about incorporating new technologies into restoration monitoring. And this is using DNA metabarcoding. So this is sort of advanced techniques for understanding soil biota, insects, et cetera. And then the final talk will be by Alan Anderson to how do we develop robust assessment frameworks for incorporating and assessing the success of fauna in restoration. So I will kick things off with Holly as our first speaker. I'll give her 2-minute warning, and I hope everyone enjoys the session.